My father-in-law didn't know I'd just inherited $8 million when he said, "You're a deadbeat. My daughter deserves someone who can actually provide." Richard Grantham said it loud enough for the entire country club dining room to hear. Silverware clinked against china. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. My wife Lily's face went white, then crimson. Her mother Diane looked down at her salmon, suddenly fascinated by the dill garnish. And I sat there, coffee cup halfway to my lips, my phone still warm in my pocket from the email I'd received 90 minutes earlier. Subject line: estate settlement finalized. Wire transfer confirmation. Amount: $8,247,000. I set the coffee cup down carefully. The porcelain made a small sound against the saucer. Richard was standing now, his face flushed the particular shade of red that came from 3 scotches and a lifetime of never being told no. He was 61, silver-haired, broad-shouldered in the way of men who'd played college football and never quite let go of that identity. He wore a navy blazer with gold buttons, khakis pressed sharp enough to cut paper, and loafers that cost more than my monthly rent. Behind him, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the 18th green and the parking lot beyond, where his Mercedes S-Class sat next to my 8-year-old Subaru. "Did you hear me?" Richard demanded. His voice carried that edge of contempt he'd been sharpening for the past 3 years, ever since I'd married his daughter. I said, "You're a deadbeat. My daughter is 32 years old, living in a rental apartment, driving a car with 120,000 miles on it, working herself to exhaustion because her husband can't provide basic security." I'd been married to Lily for 3 years, together for 5. We'd met at a community education class on urban gardening, of all places. I was 28, working as a freelance grant writer for nonprofits, living in a studio apartment in a neighborhood Richard referred to as that area. Lily was 29, an elementary school teacher with student loan debt and a smile that made me forget I was supposed to be taking notes about composting techniques. She wore paint-stained jeans and a Northwestern sweatshirt. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She laughed at my terrible joke about turning over a new leaf and gave me her number written on the back of a seed packet. Her parents had met me 4 months later at an engagement party Lily insisted on hosting despite my protests. I'd shown up in my best suit, which was a Jaws A-Bank special I'd bought for a cousin's wedding. Richard had looked me up and down like I was a used car he was considering not purchasing. "Grant writer," he'd repeated when Lily introduced us. "Interesting. And what exactly does that pay?" I'd said it varied, which was true. Some months, I made $4,000. Some months, I made nothing. Richard had smiled without warmth. "I'm sure Lily's teaching salary will help stabilize things." That had been the opening shot in a war of attrition that lasted 3 years. Richard Grantham owned Grantham Properties, a commercial real estate development firm he'd built from a single strip mall into a portfolio worth somewhere north of $40 million. He'd paid for Lily's private school education, her college tuition, her first car. He'd expected her to marry another Northwestern graduate, preferably someone in law or finance, definitely someone who could afford a house in Winnetka and a membership at this very country club. Instead, she'd married a grant writer who worked from a second-hand desk in a 1-bedroom apartment in Evanston. The criticism had been constant, but subtle at first. Questions about when I'd get a real job with benefits and stability. Suggestions that Lily deserved better than renting. Comments about how, in his day, a man provided a home before proposing. Then, it escalated. Last Christmas, Richard had handed me a business card for a commercial real estate broker position at Grantham Properties. "Since you're struggling," he'd said, "I can get you an entry-level position. 45,000 base plus commission. Better than whatever you're scraping together now." I'd declined. He'd looked at Lily and said, "Your husband has pride, but no sense." 2 months ago, things had gotten worse. Lily's car, a 2015 Toyota Camry with 115,000 miles, had needed a new transmission. $3,000. We didn't have it. We'd been saving for a down payment on a house, but we were only at $18,000 and still years away from the 20% down Richard insisted was the only responsible way to buy property. I'd suggested we use some of the house fund for the transmission. Lily had called her father instead. Richard had paid for the repair. Then he'd called me. "I need to talk to you about Lily's future," he'd said. We'd met for lunch at the university club. He'd ordered steak. I'd ordered soup. "Daniel," he'd said, cutting into his ribeye with surgical precision, "I've been patient, but my daughter is living like a college student. She deserves security, stability, a husband who can provide." I'd started to respond, but he'd continued. "I'm prepared to make you an offer. I'll hire you at Grantham Properties. 60,000 base salary. You work hard, you could make 6 figures in 3 years. You take the job, I'll help with a down payment on a decent house. 20% down on something reasonable in a good school district." "I appreciate the offer," I'd said, "but I'm happy with my work." "Happy?" Richard had laughed. "You're broke, Daniel. Lily had to call me to fix her car. You're happy being a financial burden?" I'd left without finishing my soup. Now, 2 months later, we were here. Sunday brunch at the country club, Lily's birthday celebration, her 32nd. Richard had insisted on hosting. Diane had made a reservation. Lily had asked me to please just try to get along with her father for one meal. I'd agreed because I loved my wife and because I'd been thinking about the phone call I'd gotten 3 days earlier. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Victoria Sterling from Sterling and Associates. I'm the estate attorney handling your uncle's will. I need to schedule a meeting to discuss the settlement." My uncle, Philip Whitmore, had died 6 weeks earlier. Stroke. He was 68. He'd been a professor of mathematics at the University of Chicago for 40 years, never married, no children. I'd seen him maybe once a year at family gatherings, a quiet man who talked about fractals and probability theory, and lived in a modest 2-bedroom condo in Hyde Park. I'd gone to his funeral. 11 people attended. I'd expected nothing from his estate. Maybe some books. Maybe his old chess set. The meeting with Victoria Sterling had been Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. Her office was downtown, 43rd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the lake. She was 50-something, sharp suit, sharper eyes, the kind of attorney who probably billed $800 an hour. "Mr. Whitmore," she'd said, sliding a folder across the polished conference table. "Your uncle was a very private man with very specific instructions. He left his entire estate to you." "The condo?" I'd asked. "The condo, yes. Also his investment portfolio, his retirement accounts, and a trust he'd been funding for 30 years. She'd opened the folder. "The total estate value, after taxes and fees, is approximately $8.2 million. I'd actually laughed. Inappropriate, but I couldn't help it. "I'm sorry, what?" $8.2 million, Victoria had repeated. "Your uncle was an extremely disciplined investor. He lived well below his means and invested aggressively in index funds starting in 1994. He never touched the principal. It compounded for 30 years. He lived in a 2-bedroom condo," I'd said, still not quite processing this. "He drove a 2003 Accord. He drove it until it died last year," Victoria had said. "Then he bought a 2018 Accord, paid cash. That was his one indulgence." She'd pushed a document toward me. "The funds will be wire transferred to an account of your choosing once you sign the acceptance documents. I recommend you speak with a financial advisor before making any decisions. I can recommend someone if you need a referral." I'd signed the papers in a daze. Victoria had recommended James Thornton, a financial advisor who worked with high-net-worth individuals. I'd met with James the following day. He'd been 45, calm, methodical, the kind of person who explained tax implications the way a kindergarten teacher explains shapes. "The first thing you need to do," he'd said, "is nothing. Don't tell anyone yet. Don't make any purchases. Don't change your lifestyle. Give yourself 30 days to process this. Then we'll talk about smart allocation, tax strategies, and long-term planning." "I need to tell my wife," I'd said. "Of course," James had agreed. "But I'd recommend keeping it between the two of you until you have a plan. Money changes relationships. People will treat you differently. Give yourself time to adjust before that happens." I'd agreed. I'd planned to tell Lily that night over dinner. But when I'd gotten home, she'd been on the phone with her mother, upset because Richard had called to say he was concerned about our financial trajectory and wanted to have a serious conversation about our future. I'd listened to her cry and decided to wait until after the birthday brunch. Just get through one meal with Richard, then tell Lily privately, away from her parents' influence. That had been the plan. Then Richard had started drinking. Started talking about how he'd built something from nothing and how this generation doesn't understand sacrifice. Started making pointed comments about Lily's rental apartment and my Subaru and the fact that we'd declined to join him and Diane for their annual 2-week vacation to Tuscany because we couldn't afford it. "You couldn't afford it because you don't have a real job," Richard had said, his voice rising. "You write grant applications for nonprofits that can barely pay you. You call that providing for my daughter?" Diane had touched his arm. "Richard, please, it's Lily's birthday." "It is her birthday," Richard had agreed. "She's 32 years old. She should be living in a house, not a rental. She should be thinking about children, not whether she can afford a car repair." He'd turned to me. "Do you know what I was doing at 32? I owned 3 properties. I had a portfolio. I was building something." "Dad," Lily had said quietly. Her face was pale. "Please don't do this." "Someone needs to say it," Richard had continued. He'd finished his 3rd scotch and set the glass down hard. "Your husband is a deadbeat, Lily. He's dragging you down. You deserve someone who can actually provide." The dining room had gone quiet. I'd looked at Lily. She was staring at her plate, tears building in her eyes. Diane was frozen, her hand still on Richard's arm, and Richard was looking at me with pure contempt, waiting for me to defend myself, to argue, to prove his point by getting emotional. I'd pulled out my phone instead, opened my email, found the message from Victoria Sterling sent at 10:47 that morning, just before we'd arrived for brunch. The wire transfer had completed. $8,200,000, minus the estate taxes and legal fees, was now sitting in the account James Thornton had helped me set up 3 days ago. I'd turned the phone around and slid it across the table to Richard. He'd looked at it. His expression had gone from contempt to confusion. He'd picked up the phone, read the email, read it again. The color had drained from his face. "What is this?" he'd asked, his voice different now, smaller. "My Uncle Philip died 6 weeks ago," I'd said quietly. "He left me his estate. That email confirms the wire transfer. $8.2 million, after taxes and legal fees." Lily had made a small sound. Diane's hand had dropped from Richard's arm. Richard was staring at the phone like it was a snake. He'd started, then stopped. The email is from Victoria Sterling, I'd continued. Sterling and Associates, estate attorney. You can call her if you want to verify. Her number's in the signature. I'd taken my phone back. I found out Wednesday. I was planning to tell Lily tonight, privately, after we'd talked to our financial advisor about how to handle it. But since you've decided to call me a deadbeat in front of a room full of people, I figured you should know. Richard had sat down heavily. The gold buttons on his blazer caught the light. Outside, a golf cart had driven past the window. Inside, the silence had been absolute. 8 million, Diane had whispered. 8.2, I'd corrected. Though James, that's our financial advisor, says we should think of it as about 6 million after we set aside money for taxes and establish an emergency fund. The rest will be invested conservatively. Index funds mostly. My uncle was very disciplined about that. Lily had turned to me. Daniel, what? Your uncle was rich? Richard had found his voice again, but it sounded hollow. He was comfortable, I'd said. He just lived modestly, spent 30 years investing every spare dollar, never touched the principal, died with 8.2 million and a 2018 Accord. And you didn't think to mention this? Richard's face was regaining color, but it was a different shade now, angry red giving way to embarrassed pink. I found out Wednesday, I'd repeated. I was processing it, talking to advisors, planning how to tell Lily. I wasn't planning to announce it at Sunday brunch, but here we are. A waiter had appeared, carefully not making eye contact. Can I get anyone coffee? Dessert? No, Richard had said too sharply. The waiter had vanished. Richard had turned back to me. So what's your plan? Quit your job? Buy a mansion? My plan, I'd said, is to keep doing what I'm doing. I like my work. I'm good at it. The money means we have security, but it doesn't mean I'm going to change who I am. You could work for me, Richard had said. With that kind of capital, you could invest in Grantham Properties. Become a real partner, not just an employee. I'd looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd spent 3 years making me feel small, who'd called me a burden and a deadbeat, who'd offered me charity disguised as opportunity, who'd just publicly humiliated me in front of his country club friends. No, I'd said simply. I don't think so. Richard's jaw had tightened. That's a mistake. You don't understand how to manage that kind of money. You need guidance. I have guidance, I'd said. James Thornton. He manages portfolios for people with 50 million plus. He's giving me a discount because I'm only at 8. Well, 6 after taxes. You need family, Richard had tried. People you can trust. I have family, I'd said, looking at Lily. My wife. That's who I trust. Lily had been crying quietly, not sad crying. Something else. Relief, maybe, or shock, or anger at her father. Probably all three. Lily, Diane had started, but Lily had held up her hand. Don't, she'd said. Just don't. We'd left the country club 10 minutes later, walked out past the tables of people pretending not to stare, past the host stand where the maitre d' avoided eye contact, past Richard's Mercedes and into my Subaru with the cracked windshield and the check engine light that came on every third Thursday. Lily had been quiet until we'd pulled onto the highway. Then she'd said, $8 million. 8.2, I'd said. But yeah. And you were going to tell me tonight? I was trying to figure out how. It doesn't feel real yet. She'd laughed. Genuine laughter, not the polite kind she used with her parents. My dad just called you a deadbeat in front of the entire country club. He did. And you showed him a bank transfer for $8 million. I did. Daniel, she'd said, and her voice had cracked. He's been horrible to you, for 3 years, and you never said anything. You never defended yourself. There was nothing to defend, I'd said. He was right. I didn't own property. I didn't have a portfolio. I was exactly who he thought I was. But you didn't care, she'd said. You could have worked for him, made more money. You chose to do work you cared about instead. Yeah, I'd agreed. I did. And now we have $8 million. 6 after taxes, I'd said automatically, echoing James Thornton's advice. And it doesn't change who we are. It just means we have security. We can buy a house. We can have kids without worrying. We can do the things we want to do without asking your father for help. Lily had been quiet for a moment. Then she'd said, We're not telling anyone else for a while, are we? James suggested we wait 30 days before making any decisions or announcements. Let it settle. Figure out what we actually want. I want to not live in fear of my car breaking down, Lily had said. I want to own a house with a garden. I want to have kids and know we can afford preschool. I want to go back to school and get my master's in education without taking out more loans. And I want my father to stop treating you like you're worthless. The first 4 things are now possible, I'd said. The last one might take some time. She'd laughed again, and this time it had sounded lighter. He's going to call tonight. You know that, right? He's going to apologize and offer to help manage the money and try to make this about him. Probably, I'd agreed. And we're going to say no. Definitely. We'd driven home to our one-bedroom apartment in Evanston, parked in the lot where someone had spray-painted reserved on a random space, and everyone ignored it anyway. Walked up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken again. Unlocked the door to our 800-square-foot sanctuary with the leaky bathroom faucet and the bedroom window that wouldn't quite close all the way. Lily had dropped her purse on the kitchen counter and turned to me. "Show me the email again." I'd pulled up my phone and handed it to her. She'd read it slowly this time, her eyes moving over every line. $8,247,000. Wire transfer completed. Funds available for investment allocation per client instructions. "This is real," she'd said. "It's real." She'd set the phone down and kissed me. Not a brief kiss, a real one. The kind we'd had when we first met, when we were falling in love in a community garden, before her father's disapproval had become a constant weight. "I love you," she'd said. "Not because of this. I loved you when we had nothing. But I'm so glad you don't have to take his crap anymore." "I never had to," I'd said. "I chose not to engage." "That's what made him so angry," she'd said. "You wouldn't play his game. You wouldn't let him bait you into proving yourself. You just existed, and it drove him crazy." She'd been right. Richard Grantham's power came from making people feel small, then offering them a way to earn his approval. Work for him. Accept his terms. Prove your worth on his scale. I'd refused to participate. I'd been content being a grant writer making a regular income, living in a rental, driving an old car, because I liked my work and loved my wife and didn't need Richard's validation. And now I had $8 million. The phone call came at 6:43 that evening. Lily's phone, not mine. She looked at the screen and sighed. "It's Dad." "You don't have to answer," I'd said. She'd answered anyway. "Hi, Dad." I could hear Richard's voice through the phone, loud and agitated. Lily had listened for maybe 30 seconds before cutting him off. "Dad, I'm going to stop you right there. Daniel and I are not discussing the inheritance with you right now. We're not making any decisions. We're not taking any meetings. We need time to process this." More agitated sounds from Richard. "I don't care if you know people," Lily had said, her voice firm in a way I rarely heard with her parents. "We have a financial advisor. We have an attorney. We're fine. And Dad, what you said to Daniel at brunch was unacceptable. You've been unacceptable for 3 years. I've let it slide because you're my father and I love you, but I'm done. You owe him an apology. A real one." Silence on the other end. "When you're ready to do that," Lily had continued, "you can call back. Until then, we need space." She'd ended the call and set the phone face down on the counter. That felt good. "You're shaking," I'd observed. "I've never told him no before," she'd said. "Not really. He's always been the one who decides things. Where we go for holidays, what's appropriate, what's respectable. I've spent my whole life trying to meet his standards." She'd looked at me. "You never cared about his standards." "I cared about yours," I'd said. "You wanted someone genuine, someone who wouldn't change for money or status. That's what you told me on our second date, remember? You said you'd dated guys who were obsessed with impressing your father, and it made you sick." "I remember," she'd said. "I meant it." "So did I'd said. $8 million doesn't change that. It just means we get to build the life we want instead of the life we can afford." We'd ordered Thai food that night and eaten it sitting on our secondhand couch, watching a cooking show on our old TV. The same thing we did most Sunday nights. The same thing we'd do the following Sunday and the one after that. Because James Thornton was right. The first thing you do when you inherit $8 million is nothing. You sit with it. You let it become real. You resist the urge to immediately change everything. The messages started the next morning. Richard texted me at 7:30 a.m. "We should talk. Lunch this week?" I didn't respond. He called at 9. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message about wanting to clear the air and discuss opportunities. I deleted it. Diane called Lily at 10:15. I only heard Lily's side of the conversation, but it was enough. "Mom, I understand you're concerned. No, we're not being hasty. We have professional advisors. Mom, Dad called Daniel a deadbeat in public, in front of dozens of people. He humiliated him. I know Dad was drunk, but that doesn't make it okay. No, an apology text doesn't count. When he's ready to apologize in person, sincerely, we can talk." Tuesday morning, I met with James Thornton again at his office downtown. He was waiting with coffee and a leather portfolio containing a detailed financial plan. "I've been thinking about your situation," he'd said. "You're 33. Your wife is 32. You have no debt except student loans, which we can pay off immediately if you want. You have stable employment doing work you enjoy. This inheritance gives you options, but it doesn't have to change your life overnight." "That's what we want," I'd said. "Options, not upheaval." "Smart," James had said. He'd opened the portfolio. "Here's what I recommend. First, pay off all debt. Your student loans, Lily's student loans, any credit cards, clean slate. That's about $115,000 total. Second, establish a 6-month emergency fund. Living expenses, insurance, everything. That's another $40,000. Third, buy a house. You've been saving $18,000. I'd recommend keeping that momentum, but not emptying the inheritance for it. Put down 20% on something reasonable, maybe 500,000, so 100,000 down payment. That leaves you with just over 7 million to invest. 7 million, I'd repeated. The number still didn't sound real. Conservatively invested, James had continued, that should generate about 280,000 annually in returns. Even if you withdraw 150,000 a year to supplement your current income, you'll still be growing the principal. You can both keep working because you want to, not because you have to. You can make choices based on fulfillment instead of necessity. What about taxes? I'd asked. The inheritance was already taxed at the estate level. The income from investments will be taxed as capital gains, which is favorable. I'll work with your accountant to optimize everything. But here's the thing, Daniel. You're young. You have time. Don't blow this by making emotional decisions. Don't buy a mansion because your father-in-law made you feel small. Don't quit your job to prove a point. Build the life you and Lily actually want. I'd left that meeting with a clear plan and a profound sense of relief. The money was real, but it didn't have to consume us. We could use it to build security, not to perform wealth. The next call from Richard came Wednesday afternoon. This time he tried Lily's phone first, then mine. I was working on a grant application for a homeless services nonprofit when my phone rang. I'd answered because I was expecting a call from the nonprofit's director. "Daniel, it's Richard," he'd said. His voice had been different. Not contrite, exactly, but less bombastic. "I'd like to meet. Just the two of us. No drama. I want to clear the air." I'd considered saying no, but Lily had been struggling with the tension, and I knew her parents were important to her, despite everything. "Okay," I'd said. "Coffee tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., the Starbucks on Maple." "I was thinking somewhere more private," Richard had started. "Starbucks on Maple," I'd repeated. 9 a.m. If that doesn't work, we can try again another time." He'd hesitated. "Fine, I'll see you there." Thursday morning, I'd arrived at the Starbucks at 8:50, ordered a regular coffee, found a table by the window. Richard had arrived at 9:03, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. He'd been wearing khakis and a polo shirt, not his usual business attire. He'd gotten a coffee and sat down across from me without the usual ceremony. "Thank you for meeting me," he'd said. "You said you wanted to clear the air," I'd prompted. Richard had looked down at his coffee. "What I said at the country club was out of line. I was drunk, I was frustrated, but that's not an excuse. I shouldn't have called you a deadbeat, and I shouldn't have done it publicly." "No," I'd agreed. "You shouldn't have." "I've been hard on you," Richard had continued. "For 3 years. I thought I was protecting Lily. I thought she was making a mistake marrying someone without financial security. And now that you know I have money," I'd said, "you think differently?" He'd looked up. "I think I was wrong about you." "You weren't wrong about me," I'd said. "I'm the same person I was Sunday morning. I'm still a grant writer. I still live in a rental apartment. I still drive a Subaru. The only thing that's changed is your perception." Richard had frowned. "That's not fair. You were hiding your financial situation." "I wasn't hiding anything," I'd said. "I inherited money from my uncle 6 weeks ago. Before that, I was exactly who you thought I was, a grant writer with irregular income, and you treated me with contempt because of it." "I was trying to motivate you," Richard had protested. "No," I'd said calmly. "You were trying to control me. You wanted me to work for you, to accept your version of success, to prove myself on your terms. And when I wouldn't do it, you got angry. The money doesn't change that, Richard. It just makes it more obvious." He'd been quiet for a moment. Then he'd said, "Lily told me you're keeping your job." "I am." "That's foolish," he'd said. "With $8 million, you could do anything. You could invest in real estate, start a business, build something." "I'm building something," I'd said. "A life with your daughter. A career helping nonprofits secure funding to serve people who need it. That's what I want to build." "But the money gives us security," I'd interrupted. "It doesn't obligate me to become someone I'm not. I don't want to develop commercial real estate, Richard. I'm not interested in country club memberships or luxury cars or impressing people with my wealth. I just want to live comfortably and do work that matters to me." Richard had looked frustrated, like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "You're wasting potential." "I'm living my values," I'd corrected. "There's a difference." We'd sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Richard had said, "I want to have a relationship with Lily, and with you, if that's possible. But I don't understand you, Daniel. I never have." "You don't have to understand me," I'd said. "You just have to respect me. Respect my choices. Respect my marriage to your daughter. Stop trying to change me into what you think I should be." "And if I can do that?" Richard had asked. "Then maybe we can move forward," I'd said. "But Richard, the thing you called me at brunch, deadbeat, that's not something I'm going to forget. You can apologize and I'll accept the apology, but the damage is done. We'll be polite. We'll be family. But we're not going to be close, and I'm not going to pretend Sunday didn't happen." He'd nodded slowly. "I understand." "Do you?" I'd asked. "Because it seems like you're apologizing because you found out I have money. If I'd stayed broke, would you be here?" Richard hadn't answered immediately. When he did, his voice had been quiet. "Probably not." At least you're honest, I'd said. I'd stood up. I need to get back to work. Tell Diane I appreciate her concern, but Lily and I are fine. We'll come to family dinners if we're invited, but we're setting boundaries. No more comments about my career. No more financial advice unless we ask for it. No more treating me like I'm not good enough for your daughter. And if I slip? Richard had asked. Then we'll leave, I'd said simply. We have options now, remember? I'd driven home and told Lily about the conversation. She'd listened carefully, then asked, "Do you think he actually understands?" "I think he understands he overplayed his hand," I'd said. "I don't know if he understands why what he did was wrong, but honestly, that's not my problem to fix." "I love you," she'd said. "You know that, right?" "I do." "My dad is an asshole," she'd continued. "He's been an asshole my whole life. He bullied my mom into quitting her job when they got married. He controlled every decision about my education, my career, everything. I've spent 32 years trying to earn his approval, and you never tried. You were just yourself, and somehow that's what I needed." "I'm still myself," I'd said. $8 million doesn't change that." The following week, James Thornton had called with an update. "The funds are allocated. We've paid off all your debt. Your emergency fund is established. I found a financial advisor for Lily as well, so she has her own representation. We're ready to start looking at houses whenever you're ready." Lily and I had started house hunting the following weekend. We'd set a budget of $500,000, which in our area meant a 3-bedroom house with a yard in a decent school district. Nothing ostentatious, nothing designed to impress, just a home. The realtor, a woman named Angela Foster, had been confused by our criteria. "You have excellent credit and significant assets," she'd said, reviewing our pre-approval letter. "You could afford something much larger. Why limit yourself to $500,000? "Because that's what we need," Lily had said. "We don't want to maintain a mansion. We want a house we'll actually use." Angela had shown us 12 houses over 2 weekends. We'd found the one on the second Sunday, a 1960s ranch house with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a yard with mature trees, and a basement that could be finished later. It was listed at $480,000. We'd offered $470. They'd accepted. The closing had been scheduled for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, we'd told exactly 4 people about the inheritance: James Thornton, Victoria Sterling, my brother Michael, and Lily's best friend Rachel. That was it. We didn't post anything on social media. We didn't tell Lily's extended family. We didn't announce it at work. "People will find out eventually," Lily had said one night as we'd packed boxes in preparation for the move. "They'll see the house. They'll notice we're not worried about money anymore." "Let them notice," I'd said. "We'll tell people if they ask directly, but we're not making an announcement. This is our business." Richard and Diane had been invited to the house closing. They'd declined. "We have a prior commitment," Diane had said when Lily called to extend the invitation. "But we're happy for you both." It had been a lie and everyone knew it. Richard couldn't stand the fact that we'd bought a house without his help, his advice, his involvement. But that was his problem, not ours. The closing had happened on a Thursday in mid-June. We'd signed papers for 90 minutes, handed over a cashier's check for the down payment, received the keys. The house was ours. We'd moved in the following weekend with help from Michael and Rachel. Lily had cried when she'd seen the garden space in the backyard. "We can actually plant things," she'd said. "Real things, vegetables and flowers and trees." "Whatever you want," I'd said. We'd furnished the house slowly, carefully. Some things from our apartment, some things from IKEA, some things from estate sales. Nothing rushed, nothing designed to prove a point. 3 months after the inheritance, I'd still been working as a grant writer, still making a regular income, still wearing jeans and working from my home office, which was now an actual office instead of a corner of the bedroom. The money sat in carefully allocated investments, growing quietly, providing security without demanding attention. Lily had enrolled in a master's program in education. She'd paid for the first semester in cash. No loans, no stress. She'd come home after her first class with a smile I hadn't seen in years. "I forgot how much I love learning," she'd said. Richard had called in August to invite us to the annual family vacation in Tuscany. "We'd like you to join us," he'd said, his voice carefully neutral. "Our treat." "We appreciate the offer," I'd said, "but we're planning our own trip. Japan, 2 weeks in October. We've always wanted to go." "Japan is expensive," Richard had said automatically. Then he'd caught himself. "I mean, that sounds wonderful." "It does," I'd agreed. "Maybe we'll send you a postcard." The trip to Japan had been everything we'd hoped for. Temples and gardens and incredible food. We'd stayed in modest hotels, eaten at local restaurants, taken trains instead of private cars. We'd spent 14 days exploring a country we'd both wanted to visit for years, and it had cost about $12,000 total. A rounding error in our new financial reality, but it had felt earned, meaningful, ours. When we'd gotten back, there had been a voicemail from Richard. "I've been thinking about what you said, about respect. I'm not sure I've ever really respected you, Daniel. Not the way I should have. I'd like to try to change that. If you're willing." I'd called him back. "I'm willing to see what that looks like," I'd said. "But Richard, this isn't about the money. It can't be about the money. If you can only respect me because I inherited wealth, then this won't work. I know, he'd said. And for the first time, he'd sounded like he might actually mean it. 6 months after the inheritance, we'd hosted Thanksgiving at our house. Lily had insisted. It's time, she'd said. We have space now. We can do this. We'd invited Richard and Diane, my brother Michael, Rachel and her husband, and 3 other couples from our community. 14 people total. Lily had cooked a turkey. I'd made side dishes. Rachel had brought wine. It had been chaotic and loud and perfect. Richard had arrived with Diane, holding a bottle of expensive scotch. He'd stood in our living room, looking at the modest furniture and the IKEA bookshelves and the framed photos from Japan, and he'd said, "This is a nice home." "Thank you," I'd said. "It suits you," he'd continued. "Both of you." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a confession of wrongdoing. But it was acknowledgement, and that was something. During dinner, someone had asked how we'd managed to buy a house on teacher and grant writer salaries. Lily had looked at me. I'd looked at Richard. Then I'd said, "My uncle passed away and left me an inheritance. We were fortunate." "How much?" someone had asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. "Sorry, that's rude." "It's okay," I'd said. "Enough to buy this house and have security. That's all we needed." Richard had been quiet through the exchange, but after dinner, when everyone had moved to the living room for coffee and pie, he'd pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Thank you," he'd said. "For what?" "For not making a spectacle of it. For not throwing the money in everyone's face. For being discreet." "I'm not being discreet for your benefit," I'd said. "I'm doing it because it's who I am. The money doesn't define me, Richard. It never will." He'd nodded. "I'm starting to understand that." "Good," I'd said. "Because that's the only version of me that exists. Grant Writer, Lily's husband, person who inherited money and decided to live exactly the way he wanted to anyway." "It's not the way I would have done it," Richard had said. "I know," I'd agreed. "But it's not your life. It's mine." 1 year after the inheritance, Lily had found out she was pregnant. We'd been trying for 6 months. She'd taken the test on a Saturday morning and come out of the bathroom crying. "It's positive," she'd said. We'd told our families 2 weeks later at a dinner we'd hosted. Richard and Diane had been thrilled. "This is wonderful news," Diane had said, hugging Lily. Richard had shaken my hand and said, "Congratulations." Later that night, as people were leaving, Richard had pulled me aside again. "You're going to be a good father," he'd said. "Thank you." "I wasn't always a good father to Lily," he'd continued. "I was controlling. I put too much pressure on her. I wanted her to be perfect, and I didn't make room for her to just be happy." "Why are you telling me this?" I'd asked. "Because I don't want you to make the same mistakes," he'd said. "And because I owe you an apology. Not for what I said at the country club, though that was unforgivable. For the 3 years before that. For treating you like you weren't good enough. For making Lily feel like she had to choose between you and us." "You're apologizing," I'd said. "A year later. After I inherited money. After I bought a house. After I proved I could provide." "I know how it looks," Richard had said. "But I've spent a year watching you. You didn't change. You didn't become someone new. You stayed exactly who you were. And Lily is happier than I've ever seen her. That's not because of the money. That's because of you." I'd wanted to stay angry. Part of me thought I should. But Lily was pregnant, and life was good, and holding on to rage felt like carrying weight I didn't need. "Apology accepted," I'd said. "But Richard, if you ever call me a deadbeat again, or treat Lily like she made a mistake marrying me, or undermine my choices in front of our children, we're done. Family or not. Clear?" "Clear," he'd said. "Then we're good," I'd said. Our daughter was born in May. We'd named her Sophie. 8 pounds, 3 ounces. Perfect. Lily's parents had visited the hospital the day after the birth. Richard had held his granddaughter and cried. Actually cried. "She's beautiful," he'd said. "She is," I'd agreed. "You're going to be a great dad," he'd said again. "I'm going to try." 2 years after the inheritance, I'd still been working as a grant writer. The nonprofit sector had welcomed me back after a brief hiatus following Sophie's birth. I'd been working with a homeless services organization on a $5 million grant application for a new shelter facility. The work was challenging and meaningful and exactly what I wanted to be doing. The inheritance portfolio had grown to $9.3 million. James Thornton had been managing it conservatively, as planned. We'd withdrawn about $70,000 per year to supplement our income and cover childcare costs, while Lily finished her master's degree and returned to teaching part-time. Richard and I had developed something resembling mutual respect. We'd never be close. We'd never be friends. But we could sit at the same table without tension. He'd stopped offering career advice. I'd stopped expecting him to understand my choices. One Sunday afternoon, Richard and Diane had visited to see Sophie. She was 18 months old, walking, talking, destroying everything in her path with the chaos only toddlers can achieve. Richard had watched her terrorize the living room and said, "You've built a good life here." "We have," I'd agreed. "I was wrong about you," he'd said. "For a long time. I thought providing meant money and status and all the things I value. But you provide love and stability and presence. That's worth more than I understood. Thank you, I'd said. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it, he'd added. You're seeing it now, I'd said. That's what matters. Sophie had toddled over and climbed into my lap, her small hands grabbing my shirt. Daddy, she'd said. Just that. Daddy. Richard had watched us and smiled. She's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her, I'd said. Later that night, after Richard and Diane had left, Lily had asked, Do you think he really gets it now? I think he's trying, I'd said. That's enough. You could have been angry forever, she'd said. You would have had every right. I could have, I'd agreed. But what would that have accomplished? He apologized. He's trying to change. He loves Sophie. That's more than a lot of people get. You're a better person than I am, Lily had said. I'm just tired of carrying anger, I'd said. The inheritance gave us financial freedom. I didn't realize it would also give us emotional freedom. The freedom to decide what relationships are worth maintaining and on what terms. And Richard made the cut? She'd asked. He's your father, I'd said. And Sophie's grandfather. He's earned a place in our life. A smaller place than he wanted, maybe. But a place. 3 years after the inheritance, we'd built exactly the life we'd wanted. A modest house, meaningful work, a daughter we adored, financial security that let us make choices based on values instead of desperation, and a relationship with Lily's parents that wasn't perfect, but was honest. I'd never told Richard the full extent of the inheritance. He thought it was maybe $2 million, enough to buy the house and have some savings. He didn't know about the $9.3 million in investments or the $300,000 in annual returns. He didn't need to know. The money had given us freedom, but it hadn't defined us. We'd stayed in our modest house. I'd kept my grant-writing career. Lily had finished her master's and returned to teaching. We'd lived the same life we would have lived anyway, just without the financial anxiety. And Richard? He'd learned that providing wasn't about money. It was about showing up, being present, choosing love over control. It had taken him 3 years and a very public humiliation to understand that, but he'd gotten there eventually. Sometimes I thought about that moment at the country club. Richard standing in his blazer with the gold buttons, calling me a deadbeat in front of dozens of people. Me sliding my phone across the table with an email confirming an $8 million wire transfer. The look on his face when he'd realized he'd bet wrong. I could have destroyed him, could have cut him out of our lives entirely, could have made him pay for 3 years of contempt and criticism. Instead, I'd given him a chance to grow, to change, to become someone who could be part of our life on our terms. That was the real inheritance, not the money. The freedom to choose mercy over revenge, understanding over anger, family over pride. The money was just numbers in an account. The real wealth was the life we'd built, the daughter we were raising, the choices we made every day to be the people we wanted to be, not the people others expected us to be. And Richard? He'd called me a deadbeat. He'd been wrong. But he'd learned. And in the end, that was worth more than any amount of money. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.